All right, well, good morning, everyone. My name is Heather Miller, and I am an adult programming librarian here at the La Crosse Public Library, and I'm so glad you could join us for our first Monday Mornings at Maine online edition. Today, we have a very special guest with us. We have Miss Mary Dunn, Reader's Librarian Emeritus, is joining us today, so we're very thankful for that. And we are recording this session so that those who are unable to join us are able to watch it at your convenience. Today, we are going to be discussing the history of Oktoberfest. We know we are missing you all in person, and you are missing the Oktoberfest and other festivities here in La Crosse. So we're so glad that you could connect with Mary and with us today and learn more about the history of La Crosse. So I will go ahead and unmute you here, Mary, and you can go ahead and get started.
Guten Morgen. Well, I'm really happy to be here. I was pretty excited when Heather had asked me to do this presentation. It's a program that I actually did originally 3 years ago for a memory cafe. So I expanded on it, and I'm just going to share some things on Oktoberfest, the original Oktoberfest in Munich, and then I'm going to take you to Oktoberfest in La Crosse, how it was developed, and through the 1960s. That was really an exciting time there. I don't know if many of you know how Oktoberfest came to be. Well, it all started with a wedding. We had the Prince Regent Ludwig of Bavaria and his bride, Princess Therese, and they wanted to celebrate their wedding in a very special way. So they were asking around, you know, what's something that they could do that would be different for their celebration. And one of their Bavarian National Guard's member suggested a horse race, a very large horse race. And so they were married on October 12th, 1810, and the festivities were taking place on October 17th. Now this National Guardsman, just for suggesting this, he was awarded the first gold citizens medal for inventing Oktoberfest in 1924. And there's also a street named after him in Munich. Well, the people had so much fun at that celebration, they really wanted to keep celebrating. And also it was a way to celebrate the fall harvest, you know, having that good one. So they just kept having these celebrations for the next couple of years. Now in 1813 it was canceled because it was the Napoleonic War. So it was canceled there. And then after that they just kept having these celebrations. But by 1881, today's Oktoberfest is pretty much the same thing as what it emerged into. So in the Munich one, there's lots of chickens. You'll always see the chickens on the skewers there. Lots of other food, vendors, rides, entertainment. And then there's like 7 large breweries in Munich. And of course, they all wanted to have their own beer tent. So they put up these small beer tents that would seat about 12,000. And over the years, too, they decided they needed to have it more family friendly. So only Bavarian music could be played until 6 o'clock. And then after 6 o'clock, they have what's considered their party music, which is basically American old rock music. And the tents and the whole fest grounds in Munich closed down at 10 o'clock. Now they average about 6 million visitors annually for the Oktoberfest there. And then every other year, they have what's called a Bavarian Architectural Fair, and also an area where they are doing a tribute to the old Oktoberfest. Now I have a couple of pictures of the Oktoberfest in Munich that I took. I have been to that 3 years in a row. Not that I like beer or food or anything, but it's a lot of fun. Anyway, here is a picture of the grounds. I don't know if you can see it, but it's taken from the Ferris wheel. And look at the amount of people. Now their Ferris wheel isn't your basic Ferris wheel. There's like little compartments on it that seat at least 20 people. But that's a view of the fairgrounds. And then they also have a parade similar to ours, but they don't have a lot of commercial units in there. Most of the people are dressed either in their native towns. They all have their own individual costumes, or in some of the Bavarian wear. And here again is one of the parades, and you can see their dress. And of course you need to have the beer trucks pulled by beautiful horses, which is all very similar to what we have here today. Okay, we're leaving Germany. We're coming back to the United States. Now, the Oktoberfest here was started, let's say, by a golf game. Bear with me, I'll put my thing down. Now, La Crosse in the 50s had gone through some difficult economic times. Some factories had closed down and things, and this foursome would golf every Thursday at the country club on Thursday afternoon, because that's Men's Day. And they started brainstorming of things that they could do to bring more people into the city and also to boost the morale. And these four people were Roy Cum, who was with Heilemann Brewery, Ray Ping, who was with Erickson Bakery, Don Rice, who's with the Northside State Exchange Bank, and John Coleman, who is with TC. Now you might recognize a few of the names, like the Coleman Center at TC, and Ping Manor, the Cum Center. They were very prominent businessmen. So they started thinking that maybe they should have a festival. The last festival that La Crosse had was like in 1920. And that was like a winter carnival. So Roy Cum brought this up to a couple of people that worked at the brewery by the name of Carl Mertens and Earl Albright. Now they worked for Heilemann's, and they did travel to Germany for work, and they did get to go to the Oktoberfest in Munich. And they thought that that would be a really good thing for La Crosse, especially because there is a lot of German, a lot of German people that are living here, a German background. So they started, just thinking about this. And before I go any further, I just wanted to tell you that the population in 1960 for La Crosse County was 72,465, just to give you a little, idea of the size and things. So anyway, this foursome took the idea to the chamber, and the chamber turned it over to the recreation committee of the chamber. So they had all these different committees then with the chamber. And they were pretty much the ones who were needed to organize it. So all the planning stages went in 1960, looking at having the first Oktoberfest in 1961, and the dates that they chose were October 13th to the 15th. Now the goals for this Oktoberfest were to promote local pride in La Crosse, to obtain national publicity for lacrosse, to promote tourism to La Crosse and the Coulee region, to involve a large number of people, and to break even financially while remaining a nonprofit organization. So they decided they needed a board of directors. So 12 people were chosen, and they consisted of people that worked at the chamber, Heilemans, and other prominent business people. Now, the Lacrosse October was one of the very first ones in the United States. And in fact, Oktoberfest USA is actually a trademark that they had gotten, I believe, in 1962 or 1963. So as they were, planning this, they were finalizing their plans. And I'm going to read a little part from this book called The Fest of Times, which came out in 2010. And it has a lot of memories in there. It was put together by some former fest masters. And it's very interesting, especially with a lot of the old pictures. So now they're finalizing the plans for that first fest. And these are taken from minutes from the chamber. So they have like 100 buttons to be sold at the chamber office. Happy twirlers. Now remember, at that point, square dancing was very, very big. And in fact, La Crosse was called the square dancing capital of the United States. And I remember as a kid, you could go, anywhere and you'd see them in their square dancing outfits. So anyway, the Happy Twirlers took 500 buttons to be sold to the different square dancing groups. And everyone over the age of 12 needed a button. And I remember when I was young, and it was probably a couple of years after this first fest, because I was really young then, they had special buttons for kids, which I have in my house somewhere, but I don't know where. And so then they started putting buttons, all over as also publicity, getting people excited about it. And this is something I really would like to see. They ordered 50,000 tumblers and 10,000 trays from Continental Can Company. 1 tray and 5 tumblers were to retail for $1. And I have never seen any of those tumblers or trays anywhere. I think that would be sort of fun. They also ordered 6,000 hats, and that was ordered through Dorflinger's, and they sold for 30 cents. And I do have a hat that I will show you later. I need to go to the other table and get it. Anyway, and they decided they're going to have a queen contest because everyone has to have a queen. And they would invite people also for the parade from the entire trade area. And then for the La Crosse Oktoberfest Queen, the contest, the queen would receive a $200 scholarship at a La Crosse State College or a $100 merchandise certificate redeemable at local stores. Now, the La Crosse Police Department wore brand new white crash helmets for the first time during Oktoberfest. And for the parade, they had 22 units said that they would enter the parade. And then Frank Italiano recommended that all of the high school bands participate by playing German music. And another interesting thing on insurance, Gib Chick would check to see what kind of rain insurance would be needed and the amount of the premium. Note, no discussion of liability insurance. So I thought that was rather interesting. Now that very first Oktoberfest, besides being called the Oktoberfest, a lot of them refer to it as a farm fair or a harvest fair. And I should tell you too that the location of the first Oktoberfest, the fest grounds were located on the space now occupied by the post office parking, and small tents were adjacent to Mary E. Sawyer Auditorium. The carnival was located at 7th and State in the bank parking lot. Now, one of the biggest concerns with that first fest, where was everybody going to stay who came in town for it? Because we didn't have all the hotels that we have now. So an ad went in the paper asking people with a spare room to rent to fill out a coupon listing the location. And they also checked with the railroads about using sleeper cars. So I thought that was rather interesting. Time out. Okay, now some things about that very first Oktoberfest in 1961. They had a cow chip toss. They also had a catching and dressing a greased pig contest, and 3,000 people watched that. How about a pie eating contest, which 60 kids participated, and the pie was blueberry. So wouldn't that have been fun? I know a number of you probably could have entered this. There's a husband and wife calling contest. And some examples would be, get up, dinner's ready, etc. I think that would have been really fun to see. There was a corn husking competition. And speaking of corn husking, they had corn husk decorating on lampposts all over downtown. There was also a water skiing demo. Old-fashioned steam engines participated in the demo of early log cutting in La Crosse, and that was up on the north side. A lot of the things on the north side were really geared towards the farmers. They also had 100 pieces of operating equipment, including miniatures, and a big steam engine display also up at Copeland. There was also houseboat rides, and there were train rides. For $1.75, you could take the train to Ferryville, and that was a 2-hour drive, and it left from the Burlington Depot, which was down at 2nd and Pearl Street in La Crosse. And I don't really remember that at all. But they also said that the first parade drew 30,000 to 50,000 people. And let's see, we also had a German band contest. Now, there were 3 different divisions. There was one called the junior division, which would be kids under seniors in high school. And then there was like a senior division, which would be the seniors in high school and the recent grads, and an adult division. And you'd think it'd be sort of about the German music, but it really was more about the German costumes. And there were also, with that, you know, like comical costumes was one of the categories. And there was also a category for the best dressed accordion player. So I thought that was rather interesting. And then there were huge events going on with the square dancers. So they had their first, their first fest, and 2.5 tons of bratwurst were consumed. And then the review of the fest, they considered it a huge success. But a couple of suggestions. Have the parade earlier in the morning, as this year's parade cut into retail sales. I believe the parade that year started about 3 in the afternoon, and business stayed open, and all those people went to the parade instead of shopping. Advertising of events were not too good. They want everything publicized by September 2nd, so that's over a month in advance. That would make sense. The Queen Pageant, limit the candidate speeches to a maximum of 2 minutes each. So can you imagine what was going on at that first Miss Oktoberfest if they were going to limit it to 2 minutes? I can just imagine. They want to eliminate all playground activities. Well, and another thing that they did is that they had a soccer match. And the soccer match was between the Milwaukee Bavarians versus the St. Paul Soccer Club. And as a suggestion for the following year, the soccer game needs an announcer who knows soccer. So can you imagine somebody announcing the soccer game having no idea what's going on in soccer? For the parade, they're saying use sound trucks to describe the parade at various points along the route. And that parade was televised too that first year. Do not put bands too close to each other. Number all units in the parade. And this one I was just a little surprised at. All floats should face forward. So, okay. They want more German bands throughout the entire city. And that first year they did have some bands that would play downtown, or just, you know, some individual ones just playing some German music. Encourage street dancing. Beer and food tents must be closer together. And that first fest, they did have shuttle buses, so people could park at Erickson Field in some places. But they decided that was just not worth it, so they want to eliminate the shuttle buses. And they want to eliminate the railroad excursion, and they want to do bus tours instead. And definitely include farm fair in all activities next year. Northside Farm Show had a good reception and good crowds. So I think they were quite pleased with it. All right, so now we are going to 1962. And we do have, it started in the first one, but they do have programs, which I'm getting here. And here is the first program, or from 1962. Now you could pay 25 cents for these, and they list all the activities, ads. And let me show you, here's all of the Miss Oktoberfest candidates. I know it's a little hard to see, but if you look, they list the names and they list where they live. Certainly wouldn't do that now that we had, let's see, Sharon Johnson lived at 1747 Rose Street, and she was 17 years old. Tell you just too much information, but these old programs are really fun to look at, especially for the ads, and especially if you've lived in La Crosse or La Crosse area most of your life. It's like, oh, I remember this business. Oh, I remember that. And here's a picture of the houseboat that they used. And then an advertisement for the scenic bus tours. They would leave from the Stoddard Hotel, and they'd go around Riverside Park, Mormon Coulee and St. Joseph's Ridge, Grandad's Park, or Tour 2, you went to Riverside Park, Dresbach Dam, and Skyline Drive, which is Apple Drive up in La Crescent. Now, 1962 was when the first Festmaster was chosen. And the first 4 Festmasters, the first 4 years starting from 62, were actually chosen by the Board of Directors president. The first Festmaster was Don Rice, and he was chosen because they were hoping at that point, at that period, there was a lot of division between North La Crosse and South La Crosse. So they were hoping Don Rice, being I believe he was the president of the Northside Exchange Bank, that he'd be able to tie the North and South together. And then after those four, then the Festmasters were chosen by the previous Festmasters. Now, in 1962, another activity that they had was a rodeo out on the fest grounds. And they did that for a few years. And I'm going to show you, because they did bring in some big names to have out there at the rodeo. Also, another thing that they had here was the Don Mcneal's breakfast. And I don't know if any of you remember that. Betty, I can tell you're thinking. You remember? And they came here. Now, Don Mcneal's breakfast ran on NBC from 1933, I believe on radio first, and then on television to 1968. And they did it live from the 1962 Oktoberfest. No children under 6 were allowed. People came from all over the United States to attend that. And that was actually the longest running series, at least at that point, maybe it still is, in the history of broadcasting. They also had Frankie Yankovic for the, the Happy Twirlers. And they also started a citywide bowling tournament for Oktoberfest that year. And then they invited people from the St. Paul Aquatennial and the Winter Carnival up there. So they chartered railroad cars from the cities, and the tracks went by the old Alice Chambers building to the depot where the Radisson is today. And they had like 1,000 people traveled from St. Paul and Minneapolis area just to come down here for Oktoberfest. All right, not a whole lot going on exciting in 63. I will later tell you about some of the entertainment, because they did have big entertainment during those years. But now we're in 1964. And one of the biggest things from 1964 was the tapping of the golden keg. And from an article out of the Tribune in 1964, at 3 p.m. on Wednesday, the 1964 Oktoberfest will begin. It starts with the parade of the white and gold beer wagon from the Heilemann Brewery. The wagon, an authentic renovated vehicle, will be drawn by 4 sleek Clydesdales from the farm of Floyd Jones in Bangor. On the wagon will be a barrel of cheer, which will be what the thirsts of adult Oktoberfesters will have. The Golden Barrel will move from the brewery on 3rd Street and Winnebago, east on Winnebago to 4th, north on 4th to Main, east on Main to 5th, north on 5th to the Fest grounds. Aerial bombs will be set off at the #1 fire station. Festmaster Roy Cum will be presented to the visitors, and the initial keg of brew will be tapped. Festmaster Cum takes the first drink. The loving cup is passed to the Oktoberfest officials, who will be assembled for the grand opening of this 4th annual event. And the remainder of the barrel will be dispensed to those over the age of 18 who are in attendance. The ceremonies will take place about 4 p.m. And then after that, the food and beer tents will be ready to serve visitors. So that was the first year for the Golden Keg. Now, 1964, 210,000 people attended the Maple Leaf Parade. 1,270 half barrels of beer was drunk, and 75,000 brats were consumed. 39,000 buttons were sold. And then as publicity, I thought this was sort of interesting, 600 helium balloons were filled and released, and 530 of those balloons had gift cards in them, but only 5 of them were redeemed because many of the balloons floated northward, never to be seen again. Needless to say, that was the last year that they did that. Now, for the Maple Leaf Parade, they tried to cut it down to only 2.5 hours. They cut the number of units to 117. In the year before, in 1963, there were 237 units. So if you think the parade is bad now, think of what it was back then. All right, now we're moving on to 1965. That's Lacrosse Festivals took over the fest from the Chamber. The Chamber no longer had time to really spend time, organizing it because it's gotten too big. So Lacrosse Festivals was formed to take over the fest. And in 65, 225,000 people watched the Maple Leaf Parade. And now the parade was getting national attention and more units wanted in. Hence the Torchlight Parade. So with all those extra units wanting to get in and them trying to cut down on the number of units, they decided, at one point they were just going to have the Maple Leaf Parade just be on the south side. And so now they wanted a parade up on the north side. And they really used the Torchlight Parade to use for those extra units that wanted to get into the Maple Leaf and could not get into it. And it says the Northsiders and Northside businesses had refused to sell buttons unless, the Maple Leaf Parade had included the North Side. Vern Bloss led the revolt and became the first Torchlight Parade Marshal, because they did finally get that parade up there. And do you know why it's called the Torchlight Parade? Because they used torches to light the parade route. So they had people with their torches there. And also in that year, 1965, Lacrosse was called Munich on the River. All right, we are now moving to 1966. Now, if you think of what was going on in 1966, I was only 10 years old, but I remember, some of this a little bit. But that was a lot of the protesting for the Vietnam War. And so it wasn't, real pleasant anywhere, because they were saying at all these festivals, protesting ended up, developing. And in 1966, it says here, a dark moment in Oktoberfest history, as 3rd Street element threatened to ruin the celebration. Police described the scene downtown on the weekend as a near riot. 181 people were arrested. Tavern and hotel owners are split on whether Oktoberfest should continue. John Elliott of the Hotel Stoddard tells the La Crosse Tribune, well, you can't blame the brewery for this. When we cleaned up the mess, 90% of the empties were from out-of-town breweries. Those dirty little hoodlums brought the stuff with them. In the aftermath of that, the Common Council then passed an ordinance against public consumption of alcohol. So before that, you could walk the streets with your beer can. Thousands of students came for Oktoberfest. Some of them slept in cars, parking ramps, telephone booths, or just wandered the streets. Now you can just imagine how dirty everything was. As I said before, 181 were jailed, and there were only 96 jailed in 1965. people that were living in La Crosse were calling to an end of the fest or change the beer drinking age to 21 because of the college students and drinking. So now we're going to move to 1967, and that was a very unusual fest. They decided to hold Oktoberfest, but they did not have a beer tent. So there were no beer sales. Other events required tickets and buttons. The weather was horrible. It rained the entire time. They had small crowds, but it was also the first Festmasters Ball, so that's a pleasant thing in there. The tapping of the golden keg was now replaced with the cutting of the golden cheese, and they served milk with the cheese. Governor Knowles served the cheese and milk to kick off Oktoberfest. And that year there were only 46 arrests. Heilemans, as you can imagine, withdrew all visible financial support for 1 year. They're not selling their product. Why should they support it? Advertising was discontinued outside of the normal business radius, which is considered about 75 miles. And Jay Heschler, who was a prominent businessman at the time, said, "An Oktoberfest without beer is like a wedding without a bride." So now we are moving to 1968. And the fest was almost canceled because of financial trouble. You had horrible weather. You didn't have beer sales. People weren't coming in. They owed over $10,000 at the beginning of that 1968 fest. And they would need another $15,000 just for advertisement. So in order to make up for lost revenue, they sent a letter to 1,500 area residents and businesses for their support by purchasing memberships in La Crosse festivals. Enough revenue was raised and the debt was paid off. But now they wanted to rebrand the Oktoberfest and include family in all advertisements. And if it's family, you need to have a Mrs. Oktoberfest. So that was the year when the first Mrs. Oktoberfest pageant started. And I'm going to read to you something. Now, for that first Mrs. Oktoberfest, they had 80 people entered. And then it was by an elimination. I think they did some writing and people had to recommend them. They got it down to 18. And the participants, or the contestants, I should say, were judged on homemaking, participation in church, school, and civic affairs, poise and personality, cooking, special talents, and creative hobbies. And then that first Mrs. Oktoberfest was also a fashion show. So they crowned her and had, the fashion show in there. But let me tell you about the prizes that Mrs. Oktoberfest, the winner, would include. $50 worth of groceries from her favorite IGA grocer, a corsage donated by La Crosse Floral, a tiara from George Kaufman Jewelers, $25 gift certificate from Garvalia China Shop, 100 loaves of bread from Erickson Bakery, candy from the Elite, a champagne dinner with the winner and her husband at the Cerise, and a weekend at the Bluffview Motel, 3 boxes of apple cider from the Apple Growers Association, a record album of her choice from Community Camera, a barrel of roasted chicken for the winner, and a tub to the runner-up from the Broaster House, a basket of choice fruit from Smales, hair designed by the Flairs, dress from Dorflinger, shoes from Arndt's, hat from Montgomery Ward, hose from Nemode Hosiery Shop, one steam and dry iron from Wetstein's, and makeup by Vera Andres, Vivian Woodward Cosmetics, gift certificate from Super Ice Cream, gift certificates from Arcadia Flyers, bottle of champagne from Sells, electric can opener from Wiggert's, personalized stationery from Marguerite, and a set of Teflon cookware from Kmart. And I'm going to tell you what some of them did. And this is taken from the Tribune. Our first Mrs. Oktoberfest is Mrs. Linseth. She made peppermint brownies for her entry in the cooking contest and sewed a her fest dress for the handicraft competition. And the runner-up, Mrs. Johnson, also made her Oktoberfest dress and prepared crescent rolls as a cooking specialty. So I think it's a little bit different nowadays with that. So that is 1968. Not a whole lot really going on in 1969. They started talking about having the Grenadiers at that point, but they weren't totally formalized until a couple of years after that. But also in 1968, they had, I believe that was the year they started the Flower Show. And the Flower Show had lots of different categories. That was at the Mary E. Sawyer. They had different artistic designs. And one of the things, sometimes they used different materials. The theme was Oktoberfest is having fun. So a sub-theme was a toast to the Festmaster. So arrangements all had to be in a beer stein. Hickson House tour theme. They had to use something of antique container for their designs. The Fest grounds, let your imagination run wild. So they could use anything. They also had a rose division, potted plants, herb, house plants, lots of different things. Also throughout the Oktoberfest, there's been like a photography show or an art show, stitchery and original paintings. 1963 up at Copeland, an event they had was an Indian village and ceremonial dances and a demonstration of lacrosse games like the Indian games. And they also had German and Indian dance. And I'm taking this as a quote the way it's listed. I know it's not politically correct nowadays, but that's a different time period. Now, some of the entertainment that they had over the years. Guy Lombardo in 1963. Louis Armstrong in 1964. And they gave him, here's a picture of Louis getting official Oktoberfest things. And they had 2 shows for Louis Armstrong. And I believe they seated like 3,000 each, and people came from all over the area. But did you know that Louis Armstrong first visited La Crosse back in 1916 to 1919 when he came up the old Mississippi on an excursion boat with a Dixieland band? So I thought that was sort of interesting. Oh, I'm sorry, it wasn't 3,000 attending, it was 6,000 attending, and it was 50 cent admission. and your Oktoberfest button. And that was in 1964. 1965, we had the Glenn Miller Orchestra. 66, Count Basie. Also 1966, Julius LaRosa and the Housewives Show. Homer and Jethro and Leroy Van Dyke in 1967. Now, in 1968, as I'm getting another Oktoberfest program, and see if you recognize these two people. And these, they came out, here's the first one. These are out at the rodeo. Recognize Festus from Gunsmoke? And that was, his name is Ken Hagen. How about here? From Gomer Pyle. So we had Sergeant Carter, so that was Frank Sutter. And they were out at the rodeo grounds, the Interstate Fairgrounds. And also that year in 1968, Emmett Kelly was the parade marshal. And then in 1969, we have Stan Kenton and the orchestra. And we had a lot of that big name entertainment because of Heilemans. They underwrote a lot of the money for that. You know, where I remember my mother always liked to go to the Housewives Show. And, you know, they had things with the ladies show and things. But I am going to run and just get you a couple of little memorabilias. I'll be right back. Okay. Oops. Here is one of the kids' hats from Oktoberfest. I also have some old pictures here. Okay, these are from the Maple Leaf Parade. And these would all be in the 60s. I remember floats decorated like that. Those cars and things. Here's one of the Heileman wagons. Okay, now here is Festmaster Jack Martin and Miss Oktoberfest Mary Kay Bromstead in 1967 at the Maple Leaf Parade. And I think she might have been one of them who went on and became Miss Wisconsin. Let's say for sure, but here is the 1962 Miss Oktoberfest, Marilyn Otto and her court. Here's a few pictures of some of the original Oktoberfests. These are postcards that were sent. And there you'll see the tapping of the golden keg, and here's another one with it. And here is another parade, picture from the parade. Also, we have a banner here from 1967, Mühlekite. And how about a nice little pendant? Anyway, I hope you enjoyed your travel to Germany and then your travel through the 1960s Oktoberfest. There are a lot of interesting things that went on. You know, if you ever want to see any of these old photos and these old programs and things, when the library opens up again, they're all up in archives. And it's been really fun going through some of that stuff because there's also a lot of old newspaper clippings in there. So if you want to take a little further, trip down memory lane, and, hopefully maybe sometime I can do the 70s and 80s, but I wish they'd go back and do some of the activities like they did in the 60s. Just sort of fun. But.
Sure. And the book that you referenced, Mary, The Fest of Times, I believe we have that as a circulating book. So if anyone is interested in learning more about the history of lacrosse, you can request The Fest of Times to the 50th anniversary of Oktoberfest USA, put that on hold, and you can continue your trip down memory lane as you learn about the history of Oktoberfest here in La Crosse.
You can, and I'll return that book today so you and someone else can check it out.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Mary, for that lovely return to the history of Oktoberfest. Thanks for the nostalgia and for all the interesting facts. It was very interesting to learn about the evolution from it being a harvest fest and to all the wonderful names and celebrities that we've had here in town. So that was really quite fascinating. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Heather, for inviting me. And it's nice to see some of your faces that I haven't seen. I see some names up there on it, so it was nice. I'm glad I had some people with me.
Excellent. Well, we'll go ahead and we'll end the recording now.